Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It's super fantastic because this is the first event of the year. Nobody knows what the year is going to be like. But you know what's great is that we're going to be meeting every month at different Ruby places around San Francisco, making our friendships even deeper, building things together, discovering open source, discovering and building new horizons for the Ruby on Rails community. So I'm incredibly grateful to Persona, one of the Ruby success stories, to welcome us today. And again, we are also super lucky to hear from Charles, one of the founders of Persona. So yeah, welcome, Charles.
Thanks. Got to make sure that works. But yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm Charles, CTO and co-founder of Persona. Welcome to Persona. Really glad to be hosting you all here. We love Ruby here. Use it a lot. I was told that I have to talk about Persona a little bit, so bear with me. But we work on online identity here, so really increasing trust, fighting fraud online. I think it's been an interesting time for us, especially with a lot more just AI selfies, AI IDs, and just deepfakes, all sorts of fraud happening online. But yeah. I think I had a short list of things to cover. Maybe just one more. Oh yes, we are hiring. We used to joke that if we, long ago, we used to joke that if we had scaling problems, then we'd be done. And we do have a lot of scaling problems now, and it's pretty interesting seeing kind of what comes up in Ruby land. So any help we can get, and yeah, it's be greatly appreciated, in particular around security, securing our products, our platform. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Charles, I'm giving the weekly update for the company now, right? That's what this is. So I am Samuel. I've been working at Persona for about 5 months. I've spent a bunch of time trying to make our Ruby monolith more performant. I gave a even less prepared version of this talk internally about a week ago, and we had a really fun time. So I was like, well, I should prepare something and also maybe not just like share a bunch of raw stack traces from production. And then I thought, well, it's 2026 now. The way people do this is you ask your friend Claude to make slides for you, right? I was like, here's our Google slide template. Go make slides. And Claude forgot that you're supposed to be able to read what's on the slides. So I consider this an experimentation in trying to like keep up with the times and be hip. Totally not a way of me saying I didn't spend enough time on this. Not at all. So about me, Samuel, I am ostensibly a security engineer here at Persona. You might know me from doing lots of Ruby open source stuff. Been joking with my manager is our title software engineer, security software engineer, Rails software engineer. Just trying to add like the comma and reorder the words in every way possible, as a way of getting out of answering the question of what is it that I do here. I like to joke it's whatever our CEO Rick asks me to do. Doesn't ask, he more nerd snipes me into it. As Charles said, we're doing identity verification. We do it around the globe, and at scale. And my coworker Alex Cummins gave a talk at RailsConf last year about the 7-year history of Persona Web. We're serving about 10,000 requests per second across multiple deployments and different clusters. And on top of all that, there's all the other Rails stuff that happens. There's background jobs and maintenance tasks, and that's before we even start thinking about the non-Ruby like stuff that we do to, like read driver's license and stuff. We have a really interesting, I think interesting is the polite way to say it, Rails tech stack. Who thought that you could combine MySQL and Mongo and storing a bunch of data in JSON all in one application? It certainly makes for its challenges. And we have a really customizable platform. That's great for our customers. It's great. I know, salespeople love selling that. It also can make our infrastructure a little sad sometimes. Obligatory, we're hiring. Come talk with us after this if you're interested. So I'm going to be honest, the numbers and the story I'm going to share doesn't necessarily paint us in the best light. We have some requests to our Rails app that allocate like hundreds of millions of objects. Completely normal thing to do. And that leads to slow requests and servers that get pegged at 100% CPU and the occasional unhappy customer. And our sad infra team when they get paged for stuff. Hey, Meetup graph. Claude decided I pasted in a link to a graph in Datadog, and it decided I can't read that. I'm just gonna make up some stuff. Who here's experienced that? Yeah, I appreciate the honesty. If I can find out where my mouse is, I've got a graph up here. That's what it looks like. This is our maximum number of allocations and requests. That G suffix, giga, that means billion. This scale should not go up to a billion. And yet it does very, very rarely. So taking a step back, who knows about garbage collection? Okay, we're not talking about the thing that happens every Tuesday where you put out your trash and recycling and you wake up on Wednesday morning and it's magically gone. But it's kind of like that, you make objects when they're no longer referenced, they go away, it's magical, works great, you don't think about it. You never call malloc, you never call free, you're happy, no null pointer dereferences. And it's great to leave it at that. But at our scale, garbage collection performance starts to show up. You can see in traces of our application, it'll be like, pause for garbage collection. Pause for garbage collection. Okay, now we can return the response. And that creates a real performance problem. So who knows what an allocation is? And we're not talking about, congressional budgets. So very readable, Sam. This is great. Allocations are basically when you create a new object. So make a new string. It's an allocation called object.new. that's an allocation. Write an array literal, that's an object allocation. Where did this? Let's see if we can make the syntax highlighting show up. So, you allocate strings. If you call upcase on a string, guess what happens? New string. String interpolation, what does that do? New string. I can sit here in awkward silence. Please don't make me do that. Take an array and call map on it. What does that do? New array. Start chaining onto it. Select. What does that do? Another new array. So Ruby's got a generational garbage collector, traverses the object graph from the root, marks reachable objects, and then eventually it frees everything that isn't marked. When you have more objects, as you can imagine, this takes more time. So Ruby's got a generational garbage collector. There's a young generation and an old generation. The idea being, you boot up your Rails app, allocate a bunch of objects. If those are still around after you've served a couple of requests, they're probably staying around like forever, right? New objects, more likely to go away. If you've ever looked at traces of an application, a Ruby app, and you see gaps, that's actually it's one of two things. You're like, nothing's happening. Either you're waiting for your database to return something, you're doing IO, or it's the garbage collector. Some more stuff happening. Things that aren't your Ruby applications code is running. So what does it look like to optimize allocations? So, who grew up with like reduce, reuse, recycle in school? And that was used to tell us to recycle more, right? That was at least my takeaway. But it's sort of backwards. The goal isn't to recycle more. Recycling is, the last line of defense. First, you're supposed to reduce what you use, reuse the things that you do end up using, and then at the end of the day, recycle. It's the same thing when dealing with garbage collector and allocation-driven performance. The goal is to, wow, this is incredible. If someone would like to take a photo of this and caption it with graphic design is my passion, I would appreciate that. So the goal is to reduce the number of allocations that we're doing. First off, because, allocation's bad, right? That's the takeaway. Allocation's bad. But also, allocations means your app is doing stuff, and doing things is bad. Like we're programmers. We do this for a reason, because we want to make computers do things. We don't like work. Every time you see objects being allocated, that means the code's running. Okay, this is just really painful. I apologize. So instead of I was trying to fix this like right before this started. Yeah, Justin says he does the exact same thing. Oh, I think his laptop is running right now, fixing his next talk. So, gosh, I'm just gonna skip ahead. There are two tools that I absolutely love for doing performance optimization. I have been singing their praises ever since I started here. One is Vernier. It is a sampling profiler. You can get really lovely pictures of like where time is being spent. Can also measure allocations. Another is Heap Profiler. I love this because you can see what types of objects your program is allocating, and it can be surprising. So I have here, we're going to do the fun version of this for the remainder of my time, which is what I did last week. I have here an example heap profiler report. How do I close this? So this is kind of what it looks like. Zoom, yes. There we go. This is what it looks like. You can see, how much memory are we allocating? I was trying to optimize a request that was allocating a gig of memory across, I think that's 10 million objects. And we could see, breakdown of where that memory is coming from. We can see which classes we're allocating. Basically, every time I've done this, it's the same things that show up at the top. It's strings, then strings, then strings, hashes, arrays, everything else. Pay no attention to the back traces. It turns out that pry, which we use in our Rails console, causes back traces for every exception that gets thrown to be eagerly materialized. So that does not actually happen in production. But what I really loved looking at was, what are the objects that we allocate? Okay, so our app code is like 4.5 million, active support, sets, string underscores. But what's the most fun to me is seeing, oh, hey, here's one line where we allocate 1 million strings. And on that same line, we allocate 500,000 arrays. Other fun stuff like, we're Rubyists, we like meta programming. In our macros, allocating a bunch of arrays, string inflections, all that good stuff. But then we get to my favorite, which is just the breakdown of what are those strings. Now, you see something like this. What does that look like to you? No, this string, street 1, pipe, street 2. It's yes, it is a regular expression. So here we have a regular expression, and I happen to know that, well, we've got the string street 1, we have the string street 2, and this we have the string street 1 or street 2, and the regular expression, street 1 or street 2, all coming from the same line. So every time a function in here, a method in here was called, which I think must have been about 200,000 times, we were recreating the same strings. And, that's like pretty lightweight, right? It's a string. It's not super complicated. We're not like doing algorithms here. But repeated enough times, that starts to add up. You know how I solved this? Freeze the string? Even better. Put it in a constant. Yeah. Instead of making this one regular expression 200,000 times, I made it once. And then it goes bye-bye from the heap profile. We have fun things like, as I mentioned, our platform's really customizable. And as a part of that, there are like different object shapes that you can create that get attached to things, and then they get returned in our API. And every custom thing in like the schema that you can create, well, wouldn't you know, it has a type. And then wouldn't you know that that type gets serialized as a field in the JSON. And wouldn't you know that we call underscore on every one of our JSON fields to like return pretty looking JSON. And every time you call underscore on the same string type, you know what it does? It makes a new string. So this is as I mentioned, a profile from some work I did a few months ago. All these things are gone. I walked through this and I made some of our engineers kind of sad. I think someone came out from that, lunch and learn thinking that they hate strings, which wasn't my goal. Yeah. Irina said, luckily they didn't come out hating themselves. This is true. They just came away hating the idea of whoever wrote this code. We found things we use actually relevant to my job. We use a gem called Lockbox because we handle a lot of people's PII, and obviously that's got to be encrypted. There's a gem that we use to encrypt it, and you can pass it keys that are either a hex string or bytes. And it's a Ruby gem. It's really friendly. You can give it either, and it figures out the right thing to do. And the way it does that is by saying, how long is this string? If it's 64 characters long or 32 characters long, let's interpolate that and create a regular expression to try and match a hex string. Every time you call the method that does decryption. Going through and looking at our application through this lens, I find really fun. We ended up with some pretty big performance gains by optimizing all this, but it also ended up being a way to look at what is this complex code really doing? What are the things that are happening repeatedly, what is the stuff that looks redundant? You know, how many times can you make the string street 1 or street 2? And the answer might shock you. It's a lot. So I just find this really fun. Eventually, my manager is going to tell me, Sam, stop and do security things. In fact, he tells me this every Thursday morning. Um, yeah, and he's nodding. Let the record show. Neil, yeah. So yeah, I just love talking about this stuff and looking at this stuff and optimizing this stuff. Because at the end of the day, once you go through and optimize these things, you can actually make a pretty big difference in how quickly your Rails app runs. And A, that's pretty cool and pretty rewarding. And B, you know, we get to do things like spend less money on servers. We get to do things like say to our customers, it's faster, aren't you happy now? We get to run our tests faster, a thing that I care a lot about. Our customers probably care less about that. So yeah, make Ruby faster by allocating fewer objects, TLDR. Yeah, there are any. Oh, I did something fun this week. Who here likes environment variables? Yeah. Who here uses environment variables? Okay, there we go. So Ruby, it's real easy to access an environment variable. You do env blah, and you get a string back. Do you know what happens every time you do that? New string. You're catching on. It's great. So we have some dynamic code that like turns on and off different profiling options. And it looks at environment variables to do that. And every time it went to check, hey, is profiling enabled overall? Yes, no, new string. Is profiling enabled for the currently running service? Yes, no, new string, and so on and so forth. So I, as I usually do, I came up with a pun, and that meant I had to publish a gem for it. So what's a frozen environment? The Arctic. So I published this gem called Arctic. And what it does is it just returns frozen strings whenever you access environment variables. So you replace env with Arctic. You know, it'll call the same, do the same getenv call that the standard library does. But instead of calling into RB stir new, it creates an intern string, which looks up and deduplicates the strings. So bye-bye new strings. So as I said, I'm going to stop rambling here. I can see that there seems to be a question. So perfect timing. Yeah, so what version of Ruby and Rails are we running, and how do frozen string literals play into this? Currently on Ruby 3.3.9, Rails 7.0 dot whatever. We're catching up. What was that, Molly? Oh, 7.1 tomorrow. Very exciting. So frozen string literals are great. We didn't have enabled code base wide until a couple months ago. Frozen string literals. So they certainly help a lot. They do not help with array literals. They do not help with hash literals. And they do not help with any method that you call on a string, like all of our helpful active support inflection methods, or upcase or downcase, underscore, titleize, all of those create new strings. And there are a bunch of places where you chain those things together. So I am in the process of finding them and writing caches. So we compute them once. But frozen string literals are great. I love them.
Although you were calling like the underscore and a lot of stuff that looked like maybe it was just for every JSON object. Is that for like custom objects from users that you have to do that? And you can't just like hardcode the serialize it?
So the question was, we're calling underscore on a bunch of things in JSON objects. Can't we just hard code that? Well, wrote a patch this week so that for objects that like we know about and have predefined keys, we do that once when defining a serializer instead of every time. Great question. I'm glad that you're asking it now instead of a week ago, because I can say, I thought of that. The other is someone in their infinite wisdom decided that our API should be able to return keys in JSON in not one format, not two formats, but three formats. You can underscore, you can kebab case, or you can camel case. So there's code that's like, which key inflection are we using? Call that method. So that's why that's there. That also relates to the street 1, street 2 string for reasons that I will not get into. Justin? So the Claude could see my slides. Claude probably spent more time looking at my slides than I did. I think my performance evaluation is just based on how many tokens I use. So the question was, is this graph that I showed pre or post optimization? And can I zoom? Thank you, Datadog. That is incredibly helpful. This is looking at the max of our allocations for Rails requests over the past week. I also am graphing the median. I will point out you cannot see the median on here. The maximum is so much higher. So there are a very, very small number of outlier requests that do all the complex platformy things that exhibit some really quite disturbing pathological behavior performance-wise. So that is how you can end up with 800 million allocations in one request. It is on one endpoint for one customer that gets called maybe once a day. And it makes me mad. I have Slack receipts to prove that it makes me mad. The question was like, which of these things actually help with latency? And the answer is all of them. Garbage collector pressure was showing up in profiles basically everywhere. And we did have one really fun incident where we were even getting, because of some instrumentation code that I added, and I was like, there's no way I caused this, and guess what? I did cause it. It was causing some noisy neighbor issues. So if you had a request that happened to be routed to a pod that was, serving a request for one particular, that had a bunch of GC pressure, everything got like 30% slower. So yeah, all of these end up helping with latency. The biggest thing is, just like with most performance work, doing less is faster. So it's really been finding ways to be like, oh, we're doing this how many times per request? What if we didn't? What if we did it once? What if we just didn't do it at all? What if we didn't decrypt things that aren't being used in this request? Never would have thought that would be a good idea. So, a lot of stuff like that. And I have to say, it's really cool that we're 7 years into this, and it's only now that we're really having to look into these things. This isn't like a day one building an app in Ruby problem. This is a day I can't multiply 3-digit numbers, 365 times 7 problem. Well, I think I will let better prepared people talk. Oh, Justin's saying he's better prepared. The question was, does any of this impact security? I mean, there's definitely yes and no answers here. But one of our responsibilities, like on the security team, is making sure that the site is available. You just like you don't want your site going down because of malicious actors. You want it to be available in spite of maybe bad performance. So from that sense, it's related. We've also seen our like encryption and decryption code show up as hotspots, both from the library that we're using and just like, hey, you're making one final audience response. Any guess what you're doing when you're encrypting and decrypting things? Allocating lots of strings. Thank you very much.
I'll hold this in. Let's grab with both hands. Okay, there we go. How many people does it take to change a microphone?
That's a hardware problem.
Yeah, right. And what happens when we swap the mic from one person to the next? Yes, we're allocating more strings. Oh, is it the magnet on the back? Okay. Okay, our next speaker is the illustrious Enrique Mogollán, who's going to give a talk about breaking nil to fix bugs. Enrique gave this talk actually at RubyConf 2024, I think.
Yes.
And I was there for that. It was very good. So we're asking him to give it again. Let me just put this on you, Enrique, and then we can get going.
Yeah, there is also. So what I'm going to show you after what Sam showed you that is very production ready. It's experimental, so please don't use it in production. Seriously, don't use it in production. So if we have the navigation safety operator, why should we care so much about NIL? We just use the navigation safety operator and that's it, right? No more worries about using or causing problems with NIL. So let me show you this code. And this code has an issue. And I'm gonna give you one more second to take a look at this code. And then we're gonna go into a test to see if you're paying attention. So who here thinks that the issue is number one? All right, who here thinks the issue is number two? All right, who thinks the issue is number three? All right, so actually the issue is number two. And the reason why is because params has ID, and when we send user fan by params, we're asking for the user ID. Yes, so user ID is not part of the list of params, so it will return nil. And when you do user fan by nil is equals to asking user.first. Very fun of Rails to do that. It's like, yeah, why? So user fan by nil returns a user, even with the navigation safety operator doesn't work. So that's why we care about nil. That's why we talk about it. My name is Enrique Mogollán. I'm a software engineer at Handshake. Handshake is in the business of democratizing access to education for young people or first-time workers. Handshake is also working with foundational labs to improve their models, giving access to PhDs and master candidates to help them to train their models. So if you're curious about it, come talk to us. Like there's a few people from Handshake in the meetup. And we are also a Handshake, we're a persona customer, yes. And we are one of those happy customers. We don't send any billion requests. We don't cause any problems. And a little bit more about me. I am originally from Mexico, from San Miguel de Allende. It's in the heart of Mexico. I studied computer science there. I then went and get a master's degree in Spain. And Spanish is my first language, but Ruby is my favorite language. So I want to talk about a little of the things that I assimilated when I was learning English and how like I thought, oh, this is like similar to learning a new programming language. And one of the things that caught my attention is that, for example, in English, there's one word to express love, but this is the only word that you have in English. So when you want to say different types of love, like if you want to say different, do you want to say something different to like a person that you're not in love, or like you want to express different types of love, it's complicated. Even for saying that you like music a lot, you have to provide more context. Or like the other expression that I think is like love bites, or the one that like really confuses me is like, oh, I love you as a friend. Yes, we do have like something like that in Spanish, but yeah. And one of the things that we, in English, we do is we create content or create new concepts or create new words to be able to complete what we're trying to say. And Minnesota means maths is nice, so we're nice, but it's basically like a way to describe love for the community, right? So in that area, like this code is like missing some context or missing concepts. So what can we do about it? So we're gonna do some experiments with nil. And for example, here I have data, I just like put it equals to nil. And if I try to call the method help on data, it will tell me, oh yeah, this doesn't work. But if I try to send parameters to this method, I'm gonna get the exact same error. So what if we open the nil class and we just monkey patch it? So I told you this is experimental, please don't use it in production. So we're opening the nil class, defining method missing, and you also have to define respond to missing when you are overloading method missing. So what this is gonna do is when it doesn't find a method, it will just like tell you what are the parameters or if there's a block that you are sending, and also it's gonna tell you the color. It's gonna tell you where it's coming from, which is information that currently Ruby doesn't provide. So let me go into the console. Oh yeah, before I'm gonna show you this, like I'm gonna send data, is wheel, and I'm gonna call 3 different methods. And those 3 different methods, we're gonna be able to see, oh, this is the line where we're calling that. We ignored the call. The second one, we send like parameters and we can see that, oh yeah, these are the parameters and this is the line where it's being called. And the last one, oh yeah, I'm sending a block and the block is here. So it's already giving more information of what like regular nil error. Right, so let's go back to the presentation. And basically what we did is added one more method into the nil class. Nil is a singleton of the nil class. And after we monkey patch it, we just see the method missing. All right, so we know a little bit more about this. We know where we're calling it. We know whether it has parameters on its block, but this is not configurable. It's always on. And if you're running tests, for example, you don't want to do this. So what else can we do? What can we break next? So in languages, in English, for example, when there are words that mean the same thing, that are called homographs. That mean different things, but they're spelled the same. They're called homographs. And an example is, I left my phone on the left side of the table. So it's the same word, different meaning. And in general, this happens in the same language across countries or across regions. And for me, something interesting that happened is when I was living in Spain, I learned about this in particular. But my brain associates the homographs with polymorphism, with how an object can behave in multiple ways, similar to how a word can behave in multiple ways. The example that I have in Spanish is caña, which in Mexico is just like sugar cane. But in Spain, caña also means beer. So when my friends tell me a darle caña, I thought it's like beer for everyone, but actually it means you have to hurry up, like keep going. So this was one occasion that I was working on a project that, as always, works in my local, but it doesn't work in staging. So because it was a little bit urgent, oh yeah, this is the error. Undefined method 0 for an instance of a string. Very weird error. So because it didn't work on staging and we were lucky enough to have staging number 2, I tried on staging number 2 and it worked. So it was something particular about like the staging of number 1. There are the same network, same code base. So it was something in the environment. So I log in into the staging server and I was able to reproduce the error, like same undefined method 0. All right, so I put my debug hat on and I was able to see that probably it was coming from this when I was trying to log in a client. And this is basically an HTTP request, and don't worry if you cannot read it, it's not important, but it's basically just doing an HTTP request and doing it inside net HTTP. So net HTTP calls request, it calls transport, and transport calls connect, and connect finally calls timeout. And timeout has a check for 0. And is this the error? Yes, this is the error. Timeout, undefined method 0 for an instance of a string. So what's happening here? And I took a look at how I define timeout, and timeout basically depends on whether I'm in development or not. And if I'm not in development, I take the environment variable timeout to seconds and convert that to string. But what happens if that environment variable is nil? So you get an empty string, and when you do the empty string 0, it throws you this error. But as you can see, the issue here is that I call a method into nil. So nil again causing problems. And it could have been helpful to have like the full stack trace of what was this nil doing. So this is the code that I showed you for the experiment number 1. And what we're gonna do is, instead of like just overwriting the method, we're gonna create a module where we're gonna have this. And in this case, we're gonna extend the nil with this model. But then inside method missing, one other thing that we're doing is whether decide whether if we need to raise the exception or not to make it configurable. So now that we make it configurable, we just like add a tracker helper and have an accessor to decide whether if this is on or off. All right, so let's run the experiment number 2. Oh yeah, first the code. The first case, I'm extending nil. I'm gonna say, yes, you have to raise the exception, then run this, and it's gonna rescue here. And the second part, I'm gonna say, nil, don't raise the exception, and this shouldn't raise an exception. All right, so experiment number 2. And yeah, as you can see, here is the rescue. Please ignore the exception. And then the other ones execute the code that just basically was trying to rescue the nil call. So now we have a module that is configurable. Let's go back to the presentation. And what we did basically is add raise exception accessor, and we check whether if it's enabled or not. And for the next step, for the next section, I want to talk about language evolution. And all languages evolve: English, Spanish, Italian. One example is that the word selfie is now used for what used to be self-portrait, but in Spanish is the same. Autorretrato is not used. No one says autorretrato. They use selfie. So Ruby has evolved. We have fetch since 2007, and we have the save navigated operator and dig since 2015. So if we have those methods, why we keep still facing those nil errors? All right, so this was a while ago. It was a slow time at work. I run a rake task in the development environment. It was one of microservices, and I didn't expect anything to break. I think it was right after Thanksgiving, so it was very slow. But 10 minutes after I run the rake task, I log into the web environment and it's broken. And what happened is that I see the action view template and again, nil. Why? Why, Neil? So what did I break? I broke some localization because the task failed, and then the tool to report the failures also failed. And we're not gonna look at that one, but this is the code that broke. And what I'm saying is like, it is, at that time it was 2024, and why do we still keep seeing this type of code that breaks with nil? If we could just do dig or fetch and provide defaults, right? So is there something that we can do with our nil tracker? So what if we just log the method, but also create a method on the fly to patch what was broken? So the next time you call nil and a method, it will have the method that you asked for, and then we just store that method information. So this is my idea, and I wrap it into a gem. So because this is a gem that is defeating nil, but just basically creating dynamic methods, is like a self-healing superpower for Ruby apps. So the name for this gem is Wolvernil. Yeah. So basically, just defining methods dynamically when these type of errors happen when you call something into a nil. And I have an experiment for that, and I'm gonna show you the code. But I'm gonna show you that I packed the entire gem into one file. So basically, it's the model, the method missing that we talk about. And then inside our nil tracker, I'm defining the log method that basically will create the method that you were trying to invoke and then store that information. And it will store the information in a file. Don't worry about it. But this is the code that we're gonna try to run. Oh no, this is the one. So break nil, basically. Oh, I can actually run it because it has a breakpoint. Yeah. So I run experiment.3, and when I check on when I check on data, it just has method missing. So I'm gonna continue the execution, and it's telling me here, oh, you're trying to call the method help one, And then it goes ahead and Wolverine defines the method dynamically. So when I do ls data again, the help one method exists. So I can call uh, data.help help one, and this won't cause an exception. It will just tell me, oh, you are calling this method, and this is something that has been logged. All right, so let's go back to the presentation. And this can be done as many times, help two, help three, and what we would get is something like this, where you get all the arguments, whether you send a block or not. And my idea, this was in 2024, I'd said, well, we can just feed all this information into a language model, and the language model can go ahead and fix all the issues, right? So that's the 2024 idea, right? And kind of works. But now, if we go back to, oh yeah, one reminder, don't use Wolverine in production. So we will go back to 2006. Cloud Code can fix it, can fix this kind of issues before you execute the code. How? With skills, of course. So let's take a look again at this code, and we create a skill that is just telling Claude, if you find these scenarios where there's possibilities of nil causing an issue, just avoid it or fix by using fetch, dig, or the other methods that we talk about. And don't worry, I'll share this skill if you're curious. Um, and then when I run this against the code, it just tell me, oh yeah, this is the risk, task could be nil. So the recommendation is to use dig, exactly what I was proposing. And also it's telling me you can use like even a default. Um, so yeah, life goes fast, and you cannot or should not bet against the language models because they're really good. All right, so from the code from the introduction, I ran the same Cloud Code skill, and it just basically told me, yeah, you should name the parameter more accordingly, and told me like use a better name for the parameter and use a better name for the variable that you're sending. So in this talk, we have seen how we can write a gem to override nil using some methods and tricks. We have also seen how agents are now the best way to fix those issues. There are other ways to guarantee types. Of course, you can use like Sorbet or like Ruby 4 is proposing new adventures into static Ruby analysis. And there's also, of course, if you don't want to go the full static analysis, you can use dry struct. But if that doesn't work, agents can always help you. And we also talk about like missing concept, polymorphisms, and the language evolution. But something that I feel that is really important is that you should remember that Neil is not the villain of the story. Neil is the superhero of the story. One of the best things that the Neil object has is that it helps you send bad data into the database, or it tells you when your code is wrong. So please don't blame Neil. Keep learning from it. And thank you. Gracias. Any questions? Yes. Does it create what? Sorry. Yes, it does. It does create any string. Yes, you're welcome. I probably need to use like some low labor libraries to avoid creating strings, but yeah. That's why you shouldn't use in production. Any more questions? Right, thank you.
Some of you might not recognize me because I cut my hair. I've heard that a lot. And shaved my beard. I'm Justin. Been working on ActiveAgent for a little over a year. And I've been going through a hard time. So my open mic is not gonna be shilling my gem or my consulting services, even though I just did. But it's more about burnout and how I'm not young like Marco Roth, and I can't travel around the world like he does. I know you're older than me, but last week I had what's known as a hypertensive crisis, and I almost had a heart attack. I'm 36. My blood pressure was 175 over 110. It's not good. Just take care of yourselves. I've been working for startups for 20 years, working way too much. This last year, I've traveled quite a lot. I was in Japan twice for Ruby Kaigi, Ruby World. I was in Amsterdam. I don't even remember. And that's it. Oh, also, that room, check it out if you haven't seen it. Weird. Creepy. The masks on the shelves, yeah. All right, that's it.
Sorry, I got distracted by the heads in there, or whatever that is. I was just going to mention I did some pairing with Hector Miramontes and ran into something weird that I wouldn't have guessed. Maybe a little tidbit of Ruby Arcana or whatever. But on my machine, I had a test that was always passing because it was checking for an array that contained string and integer, and his was always giving integer string. So an easy fix, of course, is just to make the assertion not order dependent because the order didn't matter. But I was still confused because I thought it should have been ordered. And digging into it, it turns out that even though hashes are ordered in Ruby as of 1.9, I think, and I assumed that the constants are stored internally in a hash table, it doesn't seem to be stored in a ordered hash table. So if you just dynamically create constants in a module and then print them out in order, eventually they won't be in order. And I don't know the internals of Matt's Ruby implementation or whatever. Wait, Matt's Ruby interpreter. But yeah, just thought that was interesting. So, and I'm on the SF Ruby Slack and I like pairing with people. So if you want to pair with me, just reach out to me on there. All right. Thanks.
I'm also gonna sit. So my name's Hector Miramontes. I was pairing up with Miles. I've been attending Ruby for about 6 or 7 months. I come from a background in public policy, which is interesting to find myself here, but I'm really enjoying the journey. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my journey so far. It's going to be short. I'm working on building a product that's called Tariff app at the moment, and I'm using it as a way to learn programming, development, product development. But I'm really enjoying the Ruby community. And back in November during the conference is a really pivotal moment for me because I got to experience just how it is possible to get started with Ruby, even if you don't have a technical background. So over the last month and a half, especially with the experience of working with Miles as a baseline like beginner, me, I've really been able to see how Ruby on Rails can get you just like set up with the basic things you need to build a website. And each element, as I've been exploring Ruby on Rails, I've been able to dig in deeper to each aspect and understand something that was really like a big undefined question for me, which was, how do you even define what software is? How do you, since it's already so ephemeral and hard to get your hands around it, it was enough to just make it more from just something so abstract to understand the actual levels of abstraction that are involved in working with software and developing it. So I'm taking all of this to build a tariff savings automation platform. That's what I'm working on. And if anyone wants to talk about it, offer any tips for building the logic, the architecture, all of that, it'll be really fun for me. Thanks.
Can you hear me well? Great. So good evening. Is it loud or is it more or less? Okay. Very excited to be here to talk about something that I love, which is Ruby. And we are going to talk about the Ruby 4, which was released in Christmas. And, you know, if you've been in the Ruby community for a while, you might be thinking that version 4 is introducing a lot of breaking changes. And it actually didn't. So I'm going to show you some of the things that they changed. But this new version is actually a celebration for Ruby because Ruby actually turned 30 a couple months ago. And so we are going to talk about 3 major innovations in Ruby. The first one is ZJIT, the new compiler, RubyBox, which improves namespace isolation, and also rectors for parallelism. But before we dive into the technical details, let me introduce myself, right? So, as Cameron said, I am half Brazilian, half Canadian. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. And I've been a developer since 2004 professionally, almost like 2 decades. So I did a major in production engineering, in industrial engineering, but I didn't end up in factories. I actually did engineering after working for 4 years with software development. And I graduated, decided to keep working as a developer. And I was in Brazil, so I'm originally from Rio de Janeiro. And in 2011, I joined a digital accelerator, and that was my first contact with Ruby. And I fell in love with Ruby. I thought it was easy to build. We were able to build the MVP in like a month. After 2 months, we had 500 customers. We were able to raise investment in that opportunity. And in 2012 was my first startup. So after that, kept doing Ruby development. And I graduated, ended up moving to Canada to work in a fintech. Became a lead developer there in this fintech. We used to build credit cards, debit cards, points cards for banks here in the US. Kind of a consulting fintech firm, right? And then I decided to stay there in Canada. I worked for a staff augmentation company here in Vancouver, no, here in the US, where I was a talent manager. So it was my first time working with engagements. And so at PayWith, I joined as a lead developer. I became naturally their manager, and I was managing a team of 25 Ruby developers. And then at gun.io, I was a talent manager for 120 developers. So a very different skill set. And I was just responsible for the technical side of the engagements. I'm currently the CTO of Strides. It's an edutech company in Brazil. We do executive education for engineering leaders, for artificial intelligence leaders, data leaders. We have around 450 members now. It's a yearly membership. People join us just to get more seniority in management. We've been doing that for 3 years. I think we've done 12 million reais so far, and it's been pretty cool. So I'm very connected with like talent management, with people development, but I've been a Ruby developer for around 14 years. So even though I did management and I do a bit of management nowadays, I still get my hands dirty as much as I can. So first question that I want to ask is, who here is already on Ruby 3.3 or 3.4? Is anybody using 4.0 already or the newest version? Cool, that's good. Just you? Okay. You know, at the end of the talk, I will want you to ask you a few questions about your experience with Ruby 4. So why Ruby 4.0 is not breaking chains? Basically, you know, as I said, this release represents a fundamental shift in the Ruby architecture. So it's not really about breaking the code. It's about building new primitives. It's about enabling things that we couldn't do before. And we will dive into this. So here's a proof that Ruby now is production ready at scale. So Shopify did 170 million requests per minute on Black Friday. And there wasn't a lab benchmark. It was real traffic, real customers, real money on the table. And it was done by Ruby and Widget. And this tells us something very important. So when I joined Ruby, the Ruby community, people would say that Ruby would be slow. And in 2011, it was, but I didn't care. I was more concerned about the speed, about understanding the value that my startup would generate for the customers. So now that Ruby has achieved some sort of maturity, we are not debating whether Ruby can scale anymore. So now the question is, how can we make the language even better, right? And the first two pillars that I want to talk about is the foundation of Ruby. So Ruby is basically introducing new primitives for isolation and compilation. And they are helping us to unlock architectural patterns that weren't possible before. The second aspect, the second pillar that I want to discuss is just the proving performance. So Widget has delivered a 92% speed up over the interpreter, and it's not theoretical. It's already in production. It is running at a global scale at Shopify. So let's start by the most difficult one, and then we go to the easiest part. Let's talk about the ZJIT. So this is where things get interesting from a compiler perspective. If you heard about Widget compiler, you might wonder, why do we need another compiler? And the answer is basically in the approach, why ZJIT takes a different approach. So it compiles entire methods, and they use static single assignment. You know, if you studied compilers in school, and I hope you miss those times, it is the textbook approach. So it is basically each variable is assigned exactly once, which makes the compiler job of analyzing and optimizing the code much simpler. And Widget, on the other hand, uses lazy basic block versioning, which means that it is compiling small blocks of code, and as it is executed, it is pretty good, as we just said, like 92% of the speed up. So it is fast to implement. It works really well in practice, and Shopify has built it and improved it. So why does ZJIT matter? I believe it matters because it enables aggressive optimization. And when you know each variable is assigned once, you can do things like eliminate that code more aggressively. You can, perform more sophisticated data flows, analysis, and also inline functions more safely. But the trade-off is still more complex to build, right? Because I would say the biggest advantage of ZJIT is that it was built in Rust, not in C. And that was a choice from the Shopify team. I believe they want the next generation of Ruby developers to be able to understand and contribute to the compiler, because I believe Rust is more approachable than C for that. So if you want to enable ZJIT in Ruby 4, you just do Ruby minus ZJIT to require that. You're gonna need to install Rust for that, and I would definitely advise you just to do for experiment. So just a quick status on ZJIT. It's faster than the interpreter, so we are already seeing interesting measurable gains in these early tests. It is not yet as fast as widget, so it is still maturing. The problem is still with the optimization work, and it is very experimental. So this is critical. Someone said before here, do not use that gem on production. So ZJIT is definitely not a dependency that you should be using. It's not the appropriate compiler to use right now. So for production, use YJIT because it's already proven. And if you want to help the Ruby future, just experiment ZJIT locally. And run your benchmarks, contribute data back to the community. And that's how I believe Ruby 4.1 will have ZJIT as default. Who has worked on a large Ruby monolithic where dependency upgrades were painful? Cool. Me too. This question is about Rubybox, and we're gonna talk a little bit about how we can deal with those large monolithic applications. So Rubybox is an architectural possibility that you can use. And you can think like, what if you could load two different versions of the same gem in the same process? So traditionally in Ruby 2, Ruby 3, you cannot do that, right? So Ruby has a global namespace. So if you require Faraday version, let's say 1.1, then you require Faraday version 2.14. The second one overrides the first. You would have to fork a different process, which could be expensive. So Rubybox solves this. It helps you create namespace, I would say isolated namespace within a single process. So classes, modules, globals, monkey paths, all confined to independent box. So here's how it works. So when you create a new box, it doesn't copy everything immediately. It shares the memory until something is updated or modified. And I brought a piece of code just to illustrate how it works. So it's pretty easy. So you would declare the Rubybox new, you would require Faraday dependence, as I said, and you'd initialize another Rubybox, and you would declare or require another Faraday version, and you would be able to use both simultaneously. So for those large monolithic applications, if you have to have two different versions of the same gene because of specific features that you have in the application, Rubybox will help you to deal with that more safely. And why does this matter? So think about these use cases. multi-tenant SaaS. So each customer have their own gym versions. One customer's plugin doesn't break another one's. Think about the blue-green deployment. Deploy a new version of your app in the same process, running alongside the old version, then switch traffic over, no downtime. You can also take advantage on the test isolation. So you can run the tests in isolated box instead of forking. So it's gonna be faster, it's gonna be cleaner, and obviously the gym version compatibility. You can load two different versions of the same dependence at the same time. So I think this is very big. It's huge for monolithic applications. And this is the kind of architectural primitive that Ruby didn't have before. And now, fortunately, it does. And then it comes the third pillar, rectors. Rectors is, we call it true parallelism via ports. And as we know, and I think the first guest was talking about thread, the first speaker, we have had threads for a long time, right? And they are limited just because of the global interpreter lock, the GLL. And we know that we cannot run, multiple threads can't execute code at the same time. So they have to take turns, and rectors, they are different as they are kind of isolated actors that can run in parallel on multiple CPU cores. So that allows us to achieve true parallelism. And in some cases, this is gonna be very helpful. So here is another example. So Ruby 4.0 introduces this new API, rector port. And this is how rectors communicate with each other. So pretty simple example, as you can see, it's clean, it's simple, it's lock-free, and you can just instantiate and pass the ports and use it. The performance gains with rector comes to 4 times speed up on the quad core. So parallelism on multi-core processors. We gain 1 million messages per second, sustained by that. So high throughput, inter-rector communication. So this is important for Ruby developers because we've been asking for parallelism for a long time. As I said, we had threads, but they are not very parallel. And we've had processes, but they're expensive, right? So rectors give us kind of a middle ground, parallel, safe, lightweight. So if you are building something that it is CPU intensive workflows, let's say data processing, machine learning, scientific computing, rectors could be very helpful. And before that, I would see people switching to different languages to solve this specific challenge. And I believe with rector, we will be able to do more with Ruby. So now the easy part. I want to talk a bit about the quality life of improvements in Ruby. So some breaking chains are going to be shown, other improvements are going to be shown. So the first example is the set path core. So now they are core parts of Ruby, so you don't need to require set anymore. You just use it directly. You can use line start operators. For me, it's still a little bit weird to put operators in the beginning of the line of the code. But it seems that both line conditions became a little bit more cleaner with that. Also, you're gonna see that array methods, like array find has been optimized. And also they have bring the array or find, which is the reverse searching for arrays. And fortunately, Ruby has also improved the error handling. So you're gonna see some improvements in the debugging, which became so much easier because now argument error shows both the color and the code snippets. So it's easier to debug. And obviously the performance, we are gaining much faster, I would say 2 to 4 times faster object allocation with heaps. And these foundational improvements benefit everything in Ruby, in my perspective. And finally, the new parser is very error tolerant and 2.5 times faster than before. And you can also use Ruby version and Ruby description directly now. And who here is responsible to upgrade Ruby versions at work? So let's do a small exercise now. So you might be wondering, how do people actually upgrade to Ruby? So I will bring the good news and also the gotchas. The good news is we have source compatibility maintained. So your code will mostly work. Binary extensions have to be rebuilt, but you don't need to change any code now. We will see that some things are being removed. As an example, rector yield, take are removed from Ruby 4. Also, process status, CGI is removed as well. And all the gem constraints that we have with 3.x will block in 4.0. So if you want to upgrade to 4.0 and you have these gem constraints, you're going to need to wait for all those gems to be upgraded as well. And my recommended approach for the upgrade would be first, depend on the version that you are. But let's say that you are in the version 3.3. So I would first upgrade to version 3.4. Fix all the deprecation warnings, and then upgrade to 4.0. By the time you do that, you have addressed most of the deprecations, and then you can enable YJIT in production and get that 92% of speed up, and just experiment locally, ZJIT and also Rubybox. Gather data, contribute back to the community, share with Ruby core team what are your thoughts about these new functionalities. Would be great for the community. So how many of you are planning to try Ruby 4 or at least enable GJIT after this? YJIT. Yeah, sorry. Great. So let me zoom out, and I will show you the bigger picture. So Ruby is, for me, it's 4 things. The first one is the foundation release. So we are building structural capacity for the next decade, not breaking compatibility, but introducing new primitives, the compiler, rectors, Rubybox that enable things that we couldn't do before. The second is YJIT production. Even though ZJIT is building the future of performance, and we are hoping to achieve that, we have now a dual compilation strategy in Ruby, which provides us both stability and also innovation side by side. The third thing is just the isolation and the parallelism. So Rubybox and rectors, they enable us architectural patterns that weren't possible before. So multi-tenant systems, blue-green deployments, true parallelism. These are now native in Ruby. And finally, the smooth upgrade, as I said, Ruby respects existing code bases while pushing forward, right? And so Ruby is turning 30. It might be older than a couple of people here in the audience, but I would say it's aggressively building the future. And so let me bring this home. So what does Ruby 4 actually mean for you as a developer? So not breaking any changes. So Ruby is turning 30 years old. Second, the tooling excellence. So now we have RBS types. Ruby LSP, Prism parser. So the Ruby developer experience is improving, stronger than ever, and it is gonna keep improving. Thank God. It's proven at massive scale, as I said. So Shopify example with 170 million requests per minute on Black Friday was a very impressive demonstration of the capability of Ruby. And true parallelism is getting mature. Rectors are aiming for stable status. Multiple compilation tiers. So we have an interpreter, we have YJIT, we have ZJIT. You can choose your performance profile based on your needs. And obviously, rootblocks, the namespace isolation for these new architectures that we were discussing. The numbers are 92% performance speed up with YJIT, 30 years of evolution with Ruby. And now I want to do an open mic here, and I would love you to tell me a bit about your experience with Ruby 4. Maybe it could be you.
It was a non-event. I started with beta 1 and rolled it out in production with beta 3, and killed 2 gems, and that was that.
Which ones?
Don't remember, but I've been slowly on a mission of removing gems from my project and making sure that the only ones I use are core.
What about Ruby Box? Have you tried it?
Won't touch it. It's a low-level feature that needs some high-level scaffolding before it becomes interesting. I said box is a low-level feature, and it needs some high-level scaffolding in the language before it becomes interesting to me as a developer, as opposed to a framework developer. It may be interesting to the Rails guys, but it's not interesting to me as an application developer yet. And I have enough problems upgrading gems. The idea of having 2 versions of the same gem with slightly different behaviors, well, no.
What about Rector? Have you tried it?
I'm a dog with a bone on reactors. I'm trying to get the Rails connection pool infrastructure to work with reactors, because I want to use reactors with solid queue. And so I've started digging into where those failures are occurring to see if this is within my capabilities or I have to pay somebody.
Anybody else want to talk about their experience with Ruby 4? My experience so far has been very positive. Like I told you that the 4 startups that I did, I used Ruby and also like JavaScript and Python. And in this current startup, we're using Ruby 4. Like Rectors has been very important for us due to the specific needs that we have. I haven't tried Rubybox a lot. Same situation that we're experiencing. And for us, the transition was very easy. Like we didn't have any issues, and we just had to fix the deprecation warnings and just have the courage to put on production, I would say. And well, this is the end of the talk. I'm happy to chat more with you. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I would be happy for that. I know that this is not my open mic, but as I said, I am in Vancouver, in British Columbia, and I spent time in San Francisco. So this time I'm staying for a month, just attending events, reconnecting with my network, and expanding my network with local people here. Also, I sometimes do that in Seattle, do that in LA as well. We'll see what comes next. But thank you for listening. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure.
All right, our last talk of the evening is it Dr. Todd Kummer? Okay, I'm sure pretty sure that's correct. Todd Kummer talking about customizing form helpers and tag helpers. Take it away, Todd.
Well, thank you, everyone. I am here to talk about Rails and one of the tools in it that is a little bit mysterious. Form builders, helpers, and tags, kind of how they all come together. We're going to look at what Rails is trying to do and how we can kind of get out of our own way. Introduction, my name is Todd Kummer, not a doctor. John, my business partner, and I recently celebrated 20 years. It's a two-person partnership. We've got a background in enterprise software, and really we specialize in building software that helps companies run their business. And kind of the funny thing probably after all the years is the hardest part is to get people to explain their business. Building the software, not so hard. I've got a couple Ruby gems that I've authored. Filterameter, I'd love to go check that out. And then a couple that got me kind of going down this rabbit hole, building a gem with Bulma, the CSS framework, and Flex, as well as one that ties those into Rails. Okay, so what is Rails trying to do for me, and how can I get out of my own way? The things that we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about tonight. I guess you guys are going to listen. Feel free to chip in where you want. What is it that a form builder provides? What is it that a form helper provides? And you might say, well, what's a form builder versus a form helper? And we'll talk a little bit about that, how the two of them interact. And then where is it that this actually happens, right? Because at the end of the day, we're rendering HTML, right? Kind of server-side rendering here. So where does that happen? And then all of this is prefaced to how can this help me build simpler applications, leverage what we know to do this. And of course, I think you really have to start and ask, is this still relevant? Now that we have AI doing everything for us, do we need to know these things? And so I think it's been my experience that the two things that help with AI and large language models the most, context and scope. And frameworks provide both of those really well. They give a context and they narrow the scope, right? Imagine building a Rails app using AI versus just building a web app, no Rails, right? So right away you think, oh, all right, well, framework did give me context and scope. So when we learn about those frameworks, we extend those frameworks, we provide additional context and additional scope. I know there's a lot of talk about prompt engineering, but if you can sort of, instead of telling it how to write that code over and over again, if you can extend your framework, it doesn't need to write that code. So I think these sorts of things are still relevant. All right, so let's talk about form builders, right? And this is what we get with form width in our views. None of us have probably ever written a form builder.new. You can sort of think of form width as a factory method for a form builder. When I want to think about how does Rails want me to do something, one trick I have is going to the generators. And so this is the scaffold generator. It's the book on how does Rails think I should do this, right? It's going to generate. And so I cracked this open. I cleaned it up just a little bit. And so here's our example, right? It says, all right, it's going to use form width. It's going to throw the model name in. And then it's just going to use form.label and then form.text field or email field or password field. And it's going to build those out. And so this is the really straightforward form width that you've seen in your applications. You've probably written this a lot of times. So we're going to dig in a little bit, look at some of the options and figure out what is form width doing for us. And so here is kind of a generated form. A couple of notes here. I'm cheating a little bit. This is not ERB. This is written in Flex. And one reason is that the form width, the form builder, it's Ruby code, right? It's not HTML. And so Flex is nice. I won't get into a lot of details of it, but I found it to be great. And it lets you focus on the Ruby code and not the template tags and the escaping things. So here is pretty much straight from the generator, right? We've got our form.label title, form.textfield title, and I'm using the age-old blog here. We've got a title and content on this form. And so you can see that there are a couple of methods here, right? Label is a method, text field is a method, and these are, they're not magic, they're just methods on a class, right? We've all written classes, we've all written methods. And so that's kind of the first thing is I want to point out is that there is a class behind this. It's a form builder. And so all we're doing here is calling methods on a class. Looking at some of the options that you use with form width. The first one and sort of if you're going the Rails way, the very resource centric way, you're just passing in your model, right? And so in my example here, my model's blog. And so that's the only thing that gets passed in. Some of the options you have here, and I think these options are interesting for what they tell us about what it's doing behind the scenes. You can pass in a scope and a URL. And this example's kind of right out of the Rails, either the guide or the API. And so it points out that if you just pass in the model, it's going to figure out for you the scope and the URL, right? And so here's some of this magic, right? When we write views, how does Rails do the things that it does? And it turns out, I mean, it's cool, but it's really not all that impressive. I'm sure you could write some code given a model to come up with, the symbol that represents that model. Rails does it for us, that's great. But, and then getting to the URL, the path, right? If you've played around a little bit, maybe you've seen that polymorphic path helper, right? So again, all Rails is doing is taking that model, coming up with a scope and a URL. So that's sort of trying to pull back the curtain there on some of that magic there. And so the scope's going to be important, so we'll keep that in mind as we move forward. And so here is the generated HTML, right? So this is what we're after. We're building out a form. One of the things that the form builder does for us is the authenticity token, right? And I sort of file that under the things that I don't really want to know about or care about. Obviously, it's got to be there. It's got to work. But it's nice. It's one of those that you get for free. And so it gives us that. Next, you can see the HTML that got generated. For our input fields, let's take a look at those. You can see the name. There's that scope, blog, as well as the attribute name. And so for the name, it has an interesting notation there, right? It almost looks like a hash, right? Where it's the scope and then the attribute name. The ID, also kind of the same, built a little bit differently. And so IDs are generally used with JavaScript to identify elements. They're supposed to be unique on a page. The names are used when the form is submitted and it builds the request parameters. And so we're going to see from the scope to the names here, and then moving forward, I have, this is the log, right? We've all seen this log entry. And so if you look at that log entry, there's your parameters, right? And again, that scope appears and the attributes. And so this is the submitted form. And then down below that is also code you're probably pretty familiar with. That's in every controller that you've ever written. It's got the newer syntax. It's params expect instead of the older params require then permit. But you see again that scope appears, the blog, and the attribute names. And so just to jump back, going back up, right, we had the magic form with and named the model, and it figured out the scope. Or alternatively, you could pass the scope in yourself. That scope gets used to build both the ID and the name fields on those input elements. And then finally, when it gets submitted, those are used here. And so you can kind of see how all those dots connect using the scopes and the attribute name. And so that is one of the things we get from the form builder, is that it puts all of those together and helps submit it. And it does so in a way that you can grab them easily in the Rails controllers. Most of this is just Rails convention. There's nothing saying that you have to use those names or pull the request parameters in that manner. But as is usually the case, if you let Rails do what it's good at, your life gets a little bit easier. So now that we've mastered form builders, I want to talk a little bit about custom form builders. And the Rails guide, again, does a really nice job here. And so I've just stolen a couple slides from them. And so the example they give in the guide is, hey, on every form that I build, I have that form.label and then form.text field. Boy, wouldn't it be simpler if the label was just automatically included every time? I think so. I literally built this example once at a client and only realized after I built it that, oh yeah, I just built the thing from the Rails guide. And so they walk you through a couple ways of doing it. The first one is they say, well, you could build yourself a helper, right? And so that first example there, text field with label. And notice it's passing in the form there. That's our form builder. And it's calling form.label and then form.text field. So it's sort of concatenating them together such that if you use this helper, you get both the label and the input every time. And then there's the example, right? So in your view, your form builder is yielded, and instead of calling form.label and calling form.text field, you call your helper. And again, important to note that this is a helper method. It's not a form builder method. So you're calling it directly and you're passing in the form. So then it goes on to say, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could build a form builder that did this for us? And so it says, all right, they're going to put a text field. They're going to override the text field method. And notice it subclasses from form builder. It overrides text field, and it does kind of the same thing that the helper method was doing. It puts in the label, and then it calls super, which is text field, right? So it's just label plus text field. And then when you look at your view now, your view looks more like it used to. It's form.text field, except that if you go at the form width, notice there's an additional option there. You've passed in the builder parameter, and that's how it knows to instantiate your builder instead of the standard Rails builder. So let's dig in a little bit. I mentioned form builders and form helpers. And if you've ever started to build a form and then had to go to the Rails API and searched for, okay, what are the arguments for email field or password field? You'll notice that, well, there's two results there. There's two methods. And it turns out that they are similar. So our form builder is what we got with form width. That is what our view code interacts with. It's interacting with that form builder. And it has methods such as label and text field, which we've seen. The helpers, they're just like any other helpers. So if you've written application helpers, right, they're global in scope. You can access them from any view. And Rails has helpers for all of these things. There's a label helper, there's a text field helper. Turns out they're all mirrored. And then finally, it turns out that the form builders actually call the form helper methods. So you thought you'd figured out that, all right, a form builder text field, that's a method that gets called on my form builder. But it turns out the form builder then calls that global helper method. And so just to look at these two methods, the first one is from the form builder. And I've cheated a little bit. It's metaprogramming in the form builder, but I just sort of resolved it as if it was this. The second one is the form helper, the global form helper. And so in the form builder, notice that its template is just its reference to the view context. And so template.text field, that is just calling the global helper. One thing it does there is that really it's about the only thing it does, that objectify options. And it turns out that method is interesting. It puts the object, your record, it stores that in the options, as well as it gets the value out. So if you've ever wondered how your form can read values, it's in there because that your record, your object gets included there. And then what does the form helper do? Turns out not much. It simply delegates to the tag classes. And so that's where the actual work gets done. That's where the HTML is actually generated. It's interesting that the form builders, right, you've got this nice encapsulation with the form builders. And you look at this code and you think, well, couldn't the form builder have called the tag directly? Probably could have. I'm guessing this has some basis in history, that perhaps it was all global helpers first and that the form builders came afterwards. I didn't get a chance to check that, but that's what I'm guessing. But this will come up later, right? That all of these flow through a global helper and you can override that helper. Just quickly to look as an example at one of those tags, how does it do the work it does? This is literally where the HTML is built. Two interesting things it does. We talked earlier about the field name and the ID, and how the name is used to build the request parameters. It turns out, and there's a little bit of dependency injection here, it passed in the view context to the tag helper. It calls back to the view context. The view context has methods called field name and field ID, and that's the one that builds the all-important blog bracket title bracket. And so that sort of connecting those dots, these two, your form names get a little complicated when you get to nested forms. And so there is a little bit of logic in here. It's not quite that straightforward, but that's where that is done. And then my last note there is a little bit silly. The method sort of ends with just tag input options, which at the end, that's all it's doing, is it's building an input tag. How it builds those options is much more interesting, and that's also in there. But I just wanted to note that you've got your form builder, calls the form helper, turns it over to a tag, and that's where the HTML gets rendered. Okay, so now that we know all this, we've figured out form builders, form helpers, we understand tags. How can we use this in our daily job? Well, it turns out we just got a new request from the product team. They would like us to implement a fancy date picker. It uses stimulus to do it. And in order to get this date picker to work, we need to replace our date input fields with the following HTML, right? So it's wrapping it with a div. It's got our stimulus controller in there. Our input, quirky enough, is not a date input. It's going to be a text input. And then we need a little, there needs to be something there for the button so that it can show, you can click on it to bring it up. And so how would we go about generating this instead of an input with a of type date? Well, we've looked at a couple different options. And the first thing we could do is to build an application helper. Sorry, I'm checking the time. No, okay. I checked the time to see if we really want to, let's do this. And I don't think we do. I'm going to move a little bit faster. So we could do this with an application helper. We could put a global helper out there, and we saw that in our earlier example. Here's click, 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 what it would look like. We've got a helper. It's just called date picker. And so now in our code, in our view code, instead of calling form.date field, we would say date picker. And remember, it's not a method on our form builder anymore, so we're going to pass in the form. And then any options. And so our logic would be simple, right? We said we needed a div that has the stimulus controller on it. We need to put in a text field that has, it's an input, or it's an input with text field instead of date. And here we just called the form helper to do that, the form method there. And then finally we need an icon there so that we have something to click on. So that's the first way we can do it, right? So that's a global helper, same as all the helpers you've ever written. It has the form builder passed in so that you're able to let Rails build that text field, because you don't want to be in that business. You want to get those name and ID helpers for free. So some of the problems is if we do it this way, we've got to go through every view and replace form.date field with our new custom helper. You could use find and replace for this little fancy regex, because sometimes it's form dot, sometimes it's f dot, sometimes it's ff dot. But the other problem is when the next time you build a form, you forget to put it in, and then someone's like, how come the date picker doesn't work on this page, right? So there's the opportunity for inconsistency. So we've seen some other ways to do this. What if we were to build a custom form builder? And it can solve this problem by overriding the date field method. And so let's click, 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 build that out. And it looks like this. So this would be a custom form builder, and we saw the custom form builder earlier. We're overriding the date field method. Notice that some of the internals are a little bit different. Now we're in the form instead of in a helper. And so the template I mentioned is just the hook out to the view context. We're calling content tag to get that div in place. It's passing in the options there to make the stimulus controller. And then we just call text field. It's not super, it's text field because we're calling a different method. And then we're also building that icon. And then finally, and this is where it can be a little bit frustrating, is figuring out how do I get these together. So in our helper, I think we concatenated them. We used concat. Down here, we're calling field.concat icon. So a little bit quirky that it's different. Turns out AI is pretty good at this stuff. But this is what we would do. And so if we did this, then our only change, there's still a change, you're going to all of your views and you're putting in that builder option in form with. You say builder and then my form builder. And then you wouldn't have to make any other changes. Anytime someone called form.date field, they're going to get the fancy new date picker. Finally, I want to talk about overriding the date field form helper. And again, click, click, click. Man, I'm fast tonight. I do want to point out that this is a little bit dangerous. This is a very sharp knife. This means that anytime there's a form.date field called, it's going to go to this code instead of the standard Rails code. And because of that, I generally, when I do this sort of thing, I put that first line in. Notice it says return super if our options say skip date picker, right? It's just sort of an emergency hatch because this is a global helper. This literally will override everything. And again, we're building the same HTML that we've built in the two previous examples. Our internals look a little bit like they did in the first one. We're calling text field because we want that and not a date field. And so that's 3 ways that you can kind of solve that problem. And so just to kind of wrap up what we looked at, so we talked about form builders. We talked a little bit about the request parameters and the way that that is one of the big things you get from form builders is that it builds those names that look a little bit like a hash. That then generates the parameters body that we then use in our controllers to assign to models. All of that is just convention, right? That's Rails convention. But again, follow that Rails convention, you get a lot for free. We looked at building custom form builders. I think that's a great option. It allows you to be, pretty surgical and roll these out at your own speed instead of kind of globally. We saw those form helpers. It's kind of a weird way to like introduce a global method in the middle of what you're kind of building a form builder and you had all your things encapsulated, and then all of a sudden it said, oh, let's go use this global method. So it's a little bit odd. Those turn around and use tags, and our tags are what generate the HTML. So thanks for giving me a chance to talk about form builders. I know that's everyone's favorite topic. I did want to point out, Irina, I think there was a bug in the card generator from the conference. For some reason, it thinks I have gray hair. I don't know why that is. But thank you, anybody. Anybody have any questions? No.
Can you go back to the slide with the form where you have the date picker? In the UI, actually. In the UI, yeah. I have a traumatizing experience with that. I just want to share with folks. Any folks from Persona still? No? So I remember it was either Persona or another Rails shop, id.me. So I was at this, I was like, filling out my passport data or something like that. And there was this date picker, and it didn't have the year. So I had to select my date of birth, going back the whole 18 years, month by month, back to my date of birth. And I was thinking there are some Ruby engineers behind this, it was definitely a Rails shop. It was Bart, right? Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
John, did you have a question?
Best practices you think around swapping in custom form. I mean, so you gave the example where for an individual form where you can specify form builder, but are there other levels you can do with that?
Yes, that's a good question. So John's asking about if you're using custom form builders, are there other places you can drop those in? And absolutely, I probably should have mentioned that. You can put it in the controller, which also means you can put it in your application controller. Essentially, there's a method you can call to say, this is the form builder I want you to use for this controller, right? And obviously, you can organize controllers in groups. And so that is a very good way, if you were to roll this out, to save yourself from having to change your views if you put it in the controller, and especially if you have a parent class of controllers, either application controller or often you have a set of controllers that descend from a single one. And so that's a great way to do that. Thank you, John. Or concern, absolutely. You can use that concern to do that and then mix that concern in anywhere you want. So those are both good ways to do that. All right. Thank you, everybody.